Descent, the coolest show on climate change. Thank you to my WPFW family. Thank you to all of our supporters, like the Union of Concerned Scientists, to the League of Conservation Voters. Today we have an amazing show. We have an amazing show with special guests on to discuss the various attacks on clean air and clean water. And first and foremost, let me just give a shout out to my co-host with the most, Mustafa Santiago Ali, who was not here. He is on the road in Houston. He's keynoting, so thank you, Mustafa. Be safe out there on your travels. Let me get right into it. First, let me give some shout outs. Today is the 6-month anniversary of Hurricane Maria hitting Puerto Rico. I just want to say first to those, there were so many activists today who were in D.C., who were outside of FEMA, who were getting arrested in the Senate rotunda. This is why we do this show. This is why we do the Hip Hop Caucus Think 100%. Why we do this show, because climate change is real. There is such a lack of housing right now. People are still in the dark. They are still in the dark. Suicides are going up. So it is very serious. This is not about Republican or Democrat. This is about humanity. Please be clear. This is about humanity. It's about doing the right thing. Folks who are in the U.S. Virgin Islands, folks who are in Puerto Rico are Americans. And we should make it is a shame to be 6 months out and they are still dealing with blackouts and not having the water that needs to have. I'm also very excited, though, with that. With that being said, I'm excited that this past weekend, in the spirit of hip-hop, you know what I'm saying, in that spirit, there was a Power to the People benefit show in Puerto Rico last Sunday with my dear brother Akon, Black Thought, Busta Rhymes, Black Star, Raekwon and Ghostface, Dead Prez, Jeremiah, Lupe Fiasco Jeremiah, who many of you know did a song on the People's Coming Music with Anthony Smith, Here Comes the Sun. And they raised money for Hurricane Maria relief and rebuilding efforts on the island. And so I just want to give a big shout out to all of them who did that. When I'm in this shout out mood right now, let me just give a shout out for the activists who are fighting the fossil fuel pipelines all over this country. And there have been many who have been on the front lines this week. Those at the Kinder Morgan pipeline in Canada, those who are the kayaktivists in Seattle. If you don't know, those are activists in kayaks. And so we want to give a shout out to those activists who were on the front line in Maryland. They were activists in Maryland who were putting up an amazing fight against the new pipelines in the state of Maryland. So I just want to give a shout out. And then, I mentioned before, this is not about Republican or Democrat, but, demonstration without legislation leads to frustration. So I definitely want to give a shout out in advance to all the congressional members that are planning to reject the Trump administration's terrible budget proposal. This would be a rejection of the dismantling of agencies like EPA that protect our health and communities, and like the clean water we're still fighting for in Flint. And so I just want to do a shout out in advance. This is encouragement for those who are in Congress to do the right thing. I don't give you Republican or Democrat or Independent. Do the right thing. Just say no to these budgets that are cutting things I don't understand how clean air and clean water is not something that you would want to fight. I understand there are those who are behind this process who want to put profits before people, but it just doesn't make sense to me. And then my final shout out, I definitely want to say this coming weekend, all over the country. And today there actually was a shooting earlier today in Maryland. But there will be, I'm so proud of these young people who are coming all over the country for the March for Our Lives. And I just want to say something to that when Dr. King marched back in 1963 with with his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, when he did that, and then that march back then in the 20th century was called the March for Jobs and Justice. So this coming weekend, we have young people, teenagers, who are marching, and their march is called the March for Our Lives. Let that just sink in for a minute. Let that just kind of hit you right now. Imagine that we were fighting for equality in the 20th century. Now we got babies who are fighting for existence in the 21st century. I mean, that's tough. But before we get into our first guest, make sure you follow us at Hip Hop Caucus, and you check out the show's blog at think100.info. That's think100.info. If you're listening to the show, I take my questions, and I hope you will have some, because this is a serious issue, on Twitter. You can ask your questions using hashtag Think100. That's hashtag Think100. So let me get into this right now. I have an amazing guest. I'm telling you, I have an amazing guest in the studio. I'm so happy to have her with me. She is the amazing Carol Bronner. She is the former administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, better known as EPA. She has led the environment and climate activism. She was an advisor for President Obama. And she's the current chair of the board for the League of Conservation Voters. That's an amazing organization, LCV. Shout out for LCV. In the studio, give it up for my dear friend, Carol Bronner. Carol, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to be with you.
No, Carol, so good to see you. And as you heard, we talked about Puerto Rico, and we heard about just so many things going on right now. So with climate change and the seriousness behind climate change, and I know you've been in this, you've led the EPA, so you've been in that, you've been around as the climate czar, as the climate advisor for President Obama. What's your inspiration?
Wow. What's my inspiration today? Those kids who are going to march this weekend, fighting for our lives.
That's right.
Young people rising up. I also want to just join you in recognizing the people of Puerto Rico. I mean,
yes.
Not only are they Americans, they're human beings.
That's right.
And they deserve to be treated with basic dignity. And it is shameful, it is embarrassing that our government is not doing that. And so, you've been all over this country reaching out to young people, activating young people, getting them involved in elections, and we need more of them involved. And so, thank you for everything you're doing and for all of the leadership that you're providing through the Hip Hop Caucus and through Respect My Vote. It's such important work. And finally, let me just say it is a real pleasure to have you on the League of Conservation Voter Board of Directors. The Rev, as we like to call them, always makes our meetings much more interesting.
That's what they call me, actually. That's what. No, that's what. And LCV is and that's important. And actually, I'm actually gonna, because you've been in this movement, and we mentioned LCV as an example and what they're doing in regards to voting. But how did you get started in this movement?
So I think a couple of things. Like all of us, there's a little bit that starts when you're a kid. I grew up in Florida. I grew up when the Everglades was still sort of a beautiful, untouched, somewhat unspoiled area. Equally important, my parents were activists. My parents were routinely demonstrating against the Vietnam War, demonstrating outside of Richard Nixon's summer home in Miami. And so they really instilled in me this sense that you need to raise up your voice, you need to be passionate about what you believe in. And I've had the great honor to serve the people of the state of Florida. I was Secretary of the Environment there. To serve the people of this country as the head of EPA for 8 years, the longest serving EPA administrator.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And then later to serve under President Obama. And you know what? I will tell you, there is nothing better than getting up every day, and getting to go to work, and thinking about how to make our air just a little bit cleaner, our water a little bit safer, and most importantly, a better future for our children. It's been an honor.
Man, I wish all EPA administrators had that thought. I wish they woke up with that feeling in their heart to protect. I want to have clean air and clean water, but we'll just keep that one kind of going. This show is actually, there's an intro. Many folks who are listening to this show think 100% the coolest show on climate change. Who are listening to this show right now, they might know actually all the aspects. So if you can just tell them, what is climate change?
Well, basically, we're just altering, we human beings are altering the climate of the earth. It's not about weather, it's not about what's going to happen today, tomorrow, next week. It's about the climate. And what that means is all sorts of very frightening and very scary things. We'll see the spread of diseases into areas where we haven't seen it before. We'll see sea level rise. My home state of Florida, they're already looking at saltwater intrusion into freshwater supplies.
And when you say sea level rising, explain, what does that mean?
So what happens is the icebergs will melt and the sea will literally rise. And so low-lying areas will start to flood up. We've already seen what are referred to as climate change refugees, people who have had to leave low-lying nations around the world because there's too much salt water. They literally can't live there, they can't farm there anymore. But the important thing, Rev, and you know this, but it's always important to say, because I think sometimes we talk about how awful the consequences will be and people throw up their hands and they're like, you know what, I gotta pick the kids up from daycare, I can't think about this. We can all think about it. We all need to think about it, and it's not too late. That's the really most important thing. It's going to be harder because we've taken a long time, but it's not too late. We can make simple decisions. We can make simple changes. 100% clean energy. It would be huge. It's doable. We have the technology. We can do what it will take. And I don't want to be, and I'm sure you don't want to be, and our listeners don't want to be the first generation. I'm 62. To pass on to another generation a problem they can't solve. We need to be about solving this one.
But let's deal with that. I mean, because science is science, right? And the realities of climate change are real. And you're right. I mean, that's the thing that motivates me to do this show. Why it motivates me to be having these conversations. But I also realize, as you mentioned, that Hurricane Irma, Harvey, Maria, what folks that I know back in Louisiana went through with Katrina, what folks that went through with Superstorm Sandy, the firestorms, the droughts, mudslides. It's getting scary. It's real. And sometimes, I have kids who come to me who listen to this show. They say, "Man, Rev, do we got a chance? Like if these folks keep pulling out from Paris and they don't want to do the Clean Power Plan, do we have, and if you can speak to those children who may be coming here for the March for Our Lives, can they march for our lives either for gun reform or climate justice or whatever we march for our lives for, do we have a chance?
We do, and we have to. We have to believe that we can solve this problem. Again, I think there are things we can do today. There are technologies that are becoming increasingly available. I think about it. When I first started in this work, right, the idea that we would find ourselves in a place where no one is building a coal-fired power plant in the United States, it's not going to happen. There may still be some out there, they need to be shut down, they need to be taken offline. But the fact that we are now at a place where we're looking at more and more renewables, we're looking at more solar, we're looking at more wind, all of that is positive. And in my experience of technology and innovation and change, it's not just linear. It's not like you take one step and then you take two and then you take three. It starts slowly, but then it gets going really, really fast. And we have that opportunity. We have the ability to take smart people, to take smart technologies, and to find solutions that will reduce the carbon pollution that is leading to climate change.
So let me change direction, and thank you for that. I feel better. I feel a little better.
It would be good if we had a president.
Well, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get to your former spot at EPA and what's going on, because there seems to be some misdirection in that regard. But you have dedicated much of your career to public service. Talk about your time at EPA. what was it like when you got there, and how did you navigate the challenge? Because I'm hoping that other folks who are listening. This is the whole. I'm a positive person. I'm hoping that folks who are now in EPA hear the positivity from you, and so they can take this to move forward. So, how did you navigate some of those challenges, and explain the importance of that agency?
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to all the people who are at the EPA, the people who have been there, and most importantly, the people who are there today. These are really, really fine public servants. These are people who have committed their lives to understanding how best to go about protecting our air and our water. And so a special thank you to the folks that I had the opportunity to work with, the career employees who bring their expertise to bear. I think it's probably pretty tough times in there right now. I don't get invited in, but my sense is it's tough times, but they deserve a shout out. They are good people. The thing to remember about the EPA is it's not free to just wake up and do anything it wants on any given day. The administrator's not free to wake up and do whatever it wants. There's the law. Congress passes a law saying we want clean air. We want you to regulate these pollutants. So EPA follows the law, and then EPA follows the science. I'll tell you a quick story.
Yeah.
When I was at EPA, there was a man called Tom DeLay. He worked for Newt Gingrich. He was a member of
Tom
Congress.
DeLay, Dancing with the Stars, Tom DeLay?
Dancing with the Stars, Tom DeLay. Yes, you might remember that. And we were in a congressional hearing, and I was testifying as an administrator of the EPA will do. And he got quite angry at me. This is in the 90s. And he said, well, you're regulating climate change. And I said, we're looking at it. You're right. We're looking at the science. It's, there's a lot of emerging science, but we're not actually setting a pollution standard. And he said to me, well, I want you to tell me whether or not you have the legal authority to do that. So I went back to my lawyers and I said, do you think we have the legal authority to regulate the pollution that leads to climate change? This was sort of a new question. It had never been thought of before. The law didn't mention it. And my lawyers, being lawyers, they took a while, but they came back and they said, if the science shows that climate change endangers public health and welfare, you have to regulate it under the law.
That's right.
So we wrote the memo. We left office. Elections matter. Mr. Gore lost. We left office. And the state of Massachusetts took that memo and sued EPA and said, you should be regulating climate change. You should be regulating carbon pollution. Mr. Bush got a Supreme Court decision that said, that's right. The Browner memo was basically right, but they didn't do anything. Lisa Jackson, a good friend of yours, came to office under President Obama and started the whole work of saying carbon pollution endangers public health and welfare. Once she said that and signed that scientific document, she had to regulate it. And that's when I was able to do work with Lisa and other people in the state of California, the car companies, to set pollution standards for carbon pollution from cars. Mr. Trump and Mr. Pruitt seem bound and determined to roll those back. That would be a big mistake because this country...
Explain that. I mean, because they're rolling back
everything.
And actually, let me just say this for those who are listening. You understand that. This is very dear because particularly for communities of color who are most at risk sometimes for pollution in their communities, this is devastating. So these rollbacks have horrendous impacts. So tell us about why. First of all, when you hear car standards, it's okay. What do you mean? A car standard is just how many doors a car has, and what do you mean when you say car standards regarding pollution? What does that mean? What is that policy, and how and why that need to remain on the books?
So it was basically two things that we did. One is we set the first ever carbon pollution standard. Lisa Jackson did that. And then another agency, the Department of Transportation, actually sets fuel efficiency standards. And so Ray LaHood set fuel efficiency standards. So you had two set of requirements so that our cars would be cleaner. The most important thing to know is a car would go further on a tank of gas, so that's good for families, they'd save some money. And what came out of it would actually be cleaner than it is today, which is hugely important, particularly in urban areas.
Right.
And the net effect was, by 2025, car companies would have to achieve a 54.5 mile per gallon fuel efficiency. That's what they want to roll back. They want to take away that effort to make our cars cleaner, to make a gallon of gas go further. And it's an important standard, it's important for communities, it's important for consumers, and it's important for climate change.
So let me just say this in that aspect, that there are things that are on the books that clearly are beneficial, not only from a standpoint of just day-to-day living, but for protecting people's health.
Absolutely.
So let's get into that. So I'm gonna get to these attacks then. I wanna deal with these attacks because there's been many recent attacks from clean water, clean air, to literally those things that are fighting, the Clean Power Plan, pulling up from the Paris Agreement. Let's deal with this. What in the world is going on? What is the mentality that if these things are good for Americans, why in the world, if you sat in that position, would you want to pollute Americans instead of protecting Americans?
It is impossible to imagine that any Democrat or Republican running the EPA would think their job is to roll back air pollution, water pollution, toxic standards. It's impossible to imagine, but that's what we have. And, I can only guess, I can only surmise from the actions that the current administration, the Trump administration is taking, that somehow or another they want to befriend polluters. They want to give polluters a break. That's the only thing you can surmise.
Is the pressure from, this doesn't make it, is the pressure from polluters that extreme? That, if you sat in that position, are they coming in and they feel, it seems like madness.
It is madness. It's absolute madness. It's crazy. And it's not what the law says. That's the other thing. Remember, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, you have to follow the law. Congress said in 1990, we're going to protect kids from toxic air pollution. That's what they said. And they said, EPA, do your job. Set these standards. Require polluters to reduce their mercury. It's a neurotoxin. Reduce your mercury pollution. And if they don't, take them to court. Hold them accountable. That's how it works. Apparently not in this administration.
Well, we have some work to do, so let's actually deal with the movement. Cause we actually, this time went fast. I tell you, this is man. Carrie, you gotta come on. You gotta come back. We gotta have we gotta get you back in here to continue this conversation. Let's deal with some of the movement. Actually, I just want to commend you. I think that, let me say this, because my friend, our partner in here, who's not here, I speak for him, Mustafa Ali would say we have real talk. That's not what if I was speaking for Mustafa. He said we have real talk in here, and so let's have a little bit of real talk. Sometimes our progressive movement, our climate movement, can be kind of male heavy, right? It can be a little male heavy, little patriarchal, and you as a woman have been amazing. You're leading from your leadership at EPA, your leadership of the board chair at LCV. And women, to me, there is no movement without women. Women are the corner. Shout out to my mama. I know she listening. They know too much. They are critical. Tell me, how do we ensure, and for the young activists, young ladies who are listening to you right now, I say, man, that's amazing. Why is it important for us to not only have more women voices, but even more importantly, to broaden the movement so people of color and other communities, indigenous communities, frontline communities, are at not just at the kiddie table, but at the table leading the discussion?
We all breathe the same air at the end of the day. And so in some parts of the country, the air is worse than in others. In some parts of the country, the water is worse than in others. Flint, Michigan, a tragic situation. But we need all the voices at the table. One thing I found when I was running EPA is I would reach out to women through their children. There's not a mother in this country who doesn't care about her children and the quality of air they breathe and the water they drink. And we saw that in Flint. We saw lots of women, lots of mothers standing up and raising their voices. And so, I think that we need to continue to engage all of the communities. I think some of the work we're able to do at the League of Conservation Voters, hugely important, bringing communities of color into the electoral process, the work that you're doing. At the end of the day, when we think about all of the tools available to protecting our environment, that will only happen if people take the time to vote.
That's right.
And they
That's
vote
right.
for people who believe that climate
Say it
change
loud.
is real.
Say it loud, say it proud.
Vote, vote. I mean, it is so fundamental to our democracy that people participate, that they become educated, they become informed. Know where your member of Congress stands on these issues. The LCB, we put out a voting card. Look at our voting card.
And what's that voting card
So a
called?
voting card takes a series of votes that have been cast in Congress, in the House, and in the Senate, and says, did you vote on the environmental side of the equation, or did you vote on the polluter side? And then we give you a letter grade, basically.
Okay, so I know everybody got an A, right?
No.
Oh, no.
No, if we graded on the, let me just say this, even if we graded on a curve.
Oh, not a curve. Don't say they didn't
There
get a
wouldn't
good.
have been everybody
Don't
getting
say
an
they
A.
don't get an A. They got a curve.
It wasn't happening.
Okay, come on. Listen, ladies and gentlemen in Congress, listen. You should always get an A for the environment. So the folks get, everybody get an F?
Yeah.
Oh,
We have, one of the issues we face right now is that we've got a political party that, at least their leadership, doesn't even think climate change is real. They're not sure, there's not enough science. I mean, they've got 1,000,001 reasons. We have more science on the reality of climate change than we've had on any other issue. I'll give you a good example. If we had waited to ban lead, to know every last little bit of information about how a kid might become sick, about how a kid might lose IQ points, which kid would lose them, we'd still have lead in our paint today. But we made a decision based on a lot of science, not every single piece of science, and we protected a whole generation of kids. We have more science on climate change than we've ever had, and we can't make a decision.
wow. And I'll say, there's some connections there, with what we do within, the civil rights community. There's a connection when we see things like Freddie Gray in Baltimore, who was poisoned by lead, and also dealing with the issues with police reform and other issues. We see those connections, right? We see how the environment impacts. We saw it with Eric Garner, and with.
I mean, I want to be clear on the lead thing. We took it out of paint. It doesn't mean there still aren't homes, low-income housing, where the lead exposure is completely off the charts. I'm not suggesting that we solve the problem all the way, but by getting it out of paint, we certainly protected. By taking it out of gasoline, we certainly protected a lot of people. We have more to do.
Let me ask you a couple of things, and then I gotta have you back. You gotta come back. Let me just say this. Our movement. We have a movement that has a lot of solutions to get to certain things, and even with our aspect, it's Think 100%, which means 100% renewable. Clean energy. Some people would say that's 2025. Some people would say 2050. As we wrap up, let me just how do we pull everybody together? Because this is serious. Because we have a clock ticking, and so I can understand we all can understand why people would be there. There's energy behind wanting to move fast, and we need to move fast. But for a movement that has to pull together, internationally has to pull together, and domestically, how do we do that?
Well, sometimes when you have an opponent, it can help to organize, and I think we're seeing that right now. I think we're seeing people coming together against the Trump administration and all of the rollbacks. But I also think it's important to remember, the environment isn't just about, or protecting the environment isn't just about a pretty place you're going to go on vacation. It is about where we live our lives.
That's right.
And how we live our
That's
lives. Right. And everybody has a stake in that.
I know that's right. Now, I can't let you get out of here. Now, this is called the Hip Hop Caucus Think 100%, the coolest show on climate change. So, I heard you guys, you had a few speeches when you've been quoting Brother Jay-Z, saying Hova, you know what I mean? So what were some of those Jay-Z quotes you were dropping in some of the speeches you gave?
Well, I love Jay-Z. He has a nice little line about 99 problems.
Okay,
I pointed out
okay.
that scientific consensus wasn't one of them.
All right,
And
okay.
then you gotta love his line, brush your shoulders.
Oh, come on now.
And what I would say is
Yeah.
to everyone listening, to every young person out there, brush your shoulders off,
Yeah.
join the movement.
Oh.